Welcome to the Deep Dive. You know our mission. We take interesting sources, unpack them, and give you the knowledge you need. Today we're getting into something pretty complex, the landscape of sexual orientation among transgender adults here in the U.S. And we're starting with this perception. You hear it a lot, especially if you spend time in queer communities online. Why does it seem like so many trans men identify as gay or queer?
Yeah, that perception is the perfect jumping off point because we're going to hold that idea up against some really solid recent U.S. data. We're mainly looking at a big 2023 study that crucially used better survey methods. Older research, it often just missed the mark entirely.
How so?
Well, the language they use, the categories,
Yeah.
they often weren't really inclusive of trans experiences or potential partners, so the results were kind of incomplete.
Okay, so our sources are this big national study with these newer, more inclusive ways of asking questions. We're taking that hard data, it's from nearly 300 trans adults, and mixing it with qualitative stuff, personal stories from communities, to see how the lived experience lines up with the numbers.
Exactly.
So I guess the question is, what actually happens when the language we use to measure identity finally catches up with, well, reality?
What happens is you immediately see that diversity is really the norm. This study, with data from 2016 to 2018, it made some really important changes.
Like what specifically?
Well, for one, the questions actually asked about all kinds of potential partners, cis men, trans women, non-binary folks, everyone. And importantly, people could pick more than one identity label.
So including terms like queer or pansexual.
Precisely. And allowing multiple answers for attraction and behavior, too. It reflects complexity.
And right away, the biggest thing that jumps out is just how different the trans population looks compared to the cis population in terms of being a sexual minority.
It's a huge difference. Looking at the whole trans group in the sample, an incredible 82.4% identified as a sexual minority.
82%, wow.
Yeah. Compare that to cisgender people in the same study, only about 9.9% identified that way.
That is just a massive gap. Is that mostly down to finally using better language, like including queer, or is there something more fundamental going on?
I think it's both, really. The inclusive language is definitely key. It lets people accurately describe themselves. But it also just reflects the reality that for many trans folks, identity and attraction can be, well, fluid. It's often multisexual.
So not just one single identity dominating.
Not at all. If you look at the breakdown for the whole trans population, bisexual was about 18.9%, queer was 18.1%, and straight heterosexual was 17.6%.
They're all clustered pretty close together.
Exactly. No single majority, just a lot of variety. The study basically just gave people the tools to show their actual complex reality.
And you see that complexity in behavior too, right? Not just how people identify. The source mentioned high rates of multisexuality in terms of partners.
Absolutely. It shows how simple labels can kind of fall short. Almost half, 47.4% of the sexually active trans people in the study reported having sex with partners of 2 or more genders in the last 5 years.
47%. And compared to cis people?
Only 5.2% of cis respondents said the same. It's a stark difference.
So if nearly half the trans population reports behavior involving multiple genders, does that kind of suggest that multisexuality is maybe closer to the norm for trans adults than strict monosexuality?
It certainly challenges that idea, yeah. Which is exactly why these more expansive, inclusive ways of measuring are so vital if we want to understand what's really going on.
Okay, so that's the big picture. Huge diversity.
Yeah.
But now let's zoom in a bit, because you mentioned the study broke things down within the trans community too, right? Like trans women, trans men, non-binary folks.
That's right. And the differences there are also really telling.
Where should we start?
Maybe with the non-binary participants. They had the absolute highest rates of identifying as a sexual minority, almost everyone, 99.4%.
Wow. Practically universal.
Yeah. And their most common identities were really expansive ones. Queer was the biggest at 35.2%, then pansexual at 15.7%, and bisexual at 12.9%.
Okay, that makes sense given the identity itself. Now let's get back to our original hook, the trans men and trans women, because the data here seems to fly right in the face of that common perception we talked about.
It absolutely does. Let's take trans men first, the largest single identity group. Surprisingly, it was straight heterosexual at 28.3%.
Straight, the largest group.
Yep. After that came gay at 15.8%, and then queer at 15.0%. So, while many are gay or queer, the biggest chunk actually identifies as straight. That really flips the common narrative.
Okay, and for trans women?
For trans women, the largest group was bisexual at 28.9%, followed by straight heterosexual at 23.3%, and then lesbian at 11.3%. So again, lots of diversity, but multisexuality, bisexual leads the way there.
That finding about the plurality of straight trans men, that's the core contradiction, isn't it, compared to what you often hear?
It really is.
And when you look just at attraction, who people are drawn to, regardless of label or behavior, does that also show this kind of expansive picture?
Oh, definitely. It's maybe even clearer there. Across the entire transgender sample, almost two-thirds, 63.9%, reported being attracted to three or more different partner genders.
64%, three or more.
Yeah. Compare that to cisgender folks, where it was only 5.9%. When you actually ask about attraction to cis women, cis men, trans men, non-binary people, all these specific groups the study included, you capture this incredibly broad reality of desire that simple labels just can't contain.
Okay, so the labels we use are catching up, showing this diversity and breadth of attraction. But identity isn't always fixed, right? The qualitative sources mention that things can shift.
Yeah.
Especially after transition.
Right. That's a really common theme in personal accounts and some qualitative studies, this idea of fluidity. One study specifically found that 40% of trans men and almost half, 49% of trans masculine people, reported some kind of change in their sexual orientation after they transitioned socially or medically.
Now, when people hear that sexuality might change post-transition, the immediate thought for many is biology. Like, oh, is it the hormones? Is testosterone changing who they're attracted to?
Yeah, that's a super common assumption. But most clinical experts, they tend to push back on that simple explanation.
Oh.
They usually suggest that hormones like testosterone mainly impact your sex drive, your libido, like how much you want sex, but not necessarily the fundamental who you find attractive.
Okay. So if it's probably not just the hormones flipping a switch, what else could be going on? The sources mention something about dysphoria and authenticity.
Exactly. It seems to be more psychological, tied to relief and being able to finally be yourself. There are a couple of main ideas that come up a lot in personal stories.
Like what?
One big one is about removing repression tied to gender dysphoria. Think about it this way. Maybe a trans man was always attracted to men deep down, but the thought of being with a man as a woman or being seen as the girl in the relationship, that could cause intense dysphoria, even repulsion. It blocks the feeling. But then, once he transitions, lives as a man, feels affirmed in that specific barrier related to dysphoria just lifts. And the underlying attraction to men can finally come to the surface, be felt, and acted on.
So the core attraction might have always been there. It was just inaccessible before.
That's the idea for some people, yeah. It wasn't that the orientation changed, but the ability to recognize, accept, and express it did.
Interesting. And what was the other idea?
The other one is more about identity itself. Just the act of realizing you're trans can kind of open up space in your head. It makes you question things you took for granted. So questioning or accepting other parts of your identity, like maybe realizing you're not straight, feels less scary or destabilizing. It's part of a bigger journey of self-discovery.
Right, like once you cross one major identity threshold, others seem less daunting.
Exactly. And that's maybe why you hear those anecdotal stories, sometimes called the pipeline, someone identifying as, say, a lesbian before transition and then identifying as a gay or bisexual man afterwards. It's like an unraveling of old assumptions.
Okay, this all paints a really complex picture. Diverse data, fluid identities, psychological shifts. Which brings us right back to that initial puzzle. If the data clearly shows straight trans men are the largest single group, why are they often so invisible in community spaces? Why does that question, why are so many trans men gay, even come up?
Yeah, it was a visibility problem. And based on discussions within the community, it seems to boil down to things like selection bias and disclosure choices. Who feels comfortable? Who feels the need to be in certain spaces?
So what are the main factors people point to?
There seem to be about three main things going on that make gay or queer trans men, GQTM, more visible, and straight trans men, STM, less so. First is the whole concept of stealth in choosing disclosure. A straight trans man who, passes easily as a cis man often has the option to just blend in, live with minimal or zero disclosure about being trans.
Because they fit the perceived norm straight guy.
Exactly. So they might not feel the need for LGBTQ plus specific community spaces for support around their gender. They can often just integrate into broader society without making their trans identity a central public thing. So they kind of disappear from queer community counts.
Okay, so they blend in. What else?
Second is a reported feeling of community exclusion or just discomfort. Some straight trans men say they don't always feel entirely welcome in LGBTQ plus spaces.
Why is that?
Well, if they look and present like a typical cisgender straight man, they might unfortunately encounter suspicion or even hostility in some queer environments where, rightly or wrongly, cis straight men are sometimes seen as outsiders or part of the group causing problems, so they feel awkward or like they don't belong or can't talk openly.
Which would also push them away from those visible community spaces.
Right. And the third factor is sort of the flip side, community need and connection. Meaning, gay or queer trans men already have a queer identity, their sexuality, that connects them strongly to the LGBTQ plus community. They often rely on those spaces for dating, for friendship, for shared understanding around both gender and sexuality.
So they have more reasons to be there and be visible.
Precisely. They often need and seek out that community more actively than a straight trans man who might find his social world elsewhere. So the people who gather in visible trans or LGBTQ plus spaces tend to be skewed towards those who need that space most. Often those with multiple marginalized identities, like being trans and gay or pansexual.
While the straight segment is more likely to just fade into the background of general society.
That seems to be the dynamic. Yeah, it skews the perception within the community itself.
Wow. Okay, so pulling it all together from this deep dive.
The reality of sexual orientation for trans adults is just incredibly diverse. Much higher rates of sexual minority identity compared to cis folks, yes, but also significant numbers of straight trans people, and this real potential for fluidity after transition. Definitely. It's way more complex than any simple label or just looking at who shows up at the local LGBTQ plus center can tell you.
It really underscores how important language is and why using these inclusive ways to ask questions in research is so critical.
Absolutely. It shows how language evolves and how finding the right words allows a truer picture to emerge.
Hmm.
And it highlights this deeper thing, right? That self-acceptance, whether it comes from internal shifts or external changes like transition, seems to unlock parts of ourselves, including desire that might have been hidden away even from ourselves.
It really makes you think when someone finds the courage to figure out and live their truth about their gender, what other hidden truths about who they are, who they love, what they desire,
Mm.
what else might come to light in that process?
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that journey of self-discovery, it's often not just about one thing. It can be about unraveling and integrating so much more, leading to a much richer, more complex sense of self overall.